Welcome everyone to History Gone Wilder, part of Half History Will Travel. I'm your host, the Wilder historian, Dr. Lucas Wilder, and last time Beauregard was sent to Charleston Harbor to look over its defenses, as the departmental commander of South Carolina, Georgia, and later part of Florida. Now we join Beauregard as he seeks to get away from that location and be sent to a much more active department. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, join the Patreon page, and purchase something from one of my online stores. Every little bit helps. Thank you. Following Beauregard's victory against the Federal fleet that attacked Charleston in April, Beauregard hoped that his victory would land him a better position in the Confederate military. He wrote to his congressional friends to increase troop strength and artillery at Charleston, all the while writing grand strategy concepts to be submitted by other generals, knowing that if he himself was to be the author, President Davis would automatically dismiss it. The military situation for the Confederacy was becoming increasingly desperate, as most armies either engaged in a stalemate with their respective opponents, or, like Ulysses S. Grant in Mississippi, the Union was gaining ground and threatening vital points in the Confederacy. Beauregard submitted a grand plan to Lewis T. Wigfall, his congressional friend, for him to submit to the War Department that involved siphoning off troops from various armies to reinforce Braxton Bragg's Army of Tennessee, that would threaten Grant's communications, draw that general into battle, defeat him, then move into Louisiana or Virginia. There is no record that his plan was ever presented to the government. If it was never seriously considered. He had not helped his cause by dreaming it up. His design was impractical and impossible, largely because it ignored the factors of logistics and resources. In its wild extravagance, it marked a reversion to his pre-Manassas habit of producing military fantasies. If Davis saw it, he must have been more convinced than ever that Beauregard was unfit for field command. Robert E. Lee, commander of the Army in Northern Virginia, submitted a request to President Davis that Beauregard should be moved to Virginia with his command. The vagueness of the request makes some historians believe that Lee wanted Beauregard to take command of his army while he addressed crises in other locations, but it was in all likelihood that Lee wanted Beauregard to take command of Virginia while he led the Army in Northern Virginia in what would become the Gettysburg Campaign. Beauregard despaired at none of his suggestions being acted upon. Worse yet, Davis suggested that he move his command to Mobile to guard that threatened point, but Beauregard didn't see the Federal threat lightening up in his front and refused to go unless ordered. He wrote to Joseph E. Johnston complaining of Davis and the President's lack of vision, then turned his attention to Lee, saying, "Whereas of what earthly use is that raid of Lee's army, in violation of all the principles of war? Is it going to end the struggle, take Washington, or save the Mississippi Valley? I hope everything will yet turn out well, although I do not exactly see how." By the summer of 1863, Union initiatives to capture Charleston increased. Beauregard could muster a little over 5,000 men to guard the city, but he felt confident in the artillery that he could concentrate against an approaching foe. The Union target was Fort Sumter, the symbol of the rebellion where the Civil War began. They quickly gained a beachhead on Morris Island by crossing the inlet, separating that island from Folly Island. Battery Wagner guarded the way toward Battery Gregg and Fort Sumter. The Federals launched infantry assaults that failed and then began to heavily bombard the position as well as Sumter. Near the end of August, the Union installed a 200-pound Parrott rifle in the marsh between Morris Island and James Island that they called Swamp Angel. The Union commander of the operations against Charleston, Quincy A. Gilmore, sent a message to Beauregard stating that if he didn't surrender Sumter and Morris Island, that he would fire on Charleston. Through miscommunication, the message was sent back to Gilmore without Beauregard's signature or his acknowledgement. Gilmore fired on Charleston, then sent the message back, asking for the evacuation of the island and the fort. Beauregard wrote back defiantly that, "It would appear, sir, that despairing of reducing these works, you now resort to the novel measure of turning your guns against the old men, the women and children, and the hospitals of a sleeping city, an act of inexcusable barbarity." Gilmore fired shells into the city, but on the 36th shot, the barrel burst. All the labor of getting the gun into range through the swamp was for nothing. This didn't stop the Federals, who continued the siege of Morris Island, resulting in Beauregard having to abandon the island after tens of thousands of shells decimated parts of Fort Sumter and the garrison at Battery Wagner. With Morris Island taken, the next step was to take Sumter. Admiral John A. Dahlgren, the commander of the naval element of the forces opposing Charleston, sent a message to the garrison at Sumter to surrender. The garrison sent the message to Beauregard, who returned to Dahlgren a message saying, "Tell Admiral Dahlgren to come and take it." Despite the superior firepower of the Union, Beauregard was able to hold on to Sumter, but the Union forces weren't going away. President Jefferson Davis stopped in at Charleston after attempting to settle a squabble in the Army of Tennessee outside of Chattanooga. Beauregard greeted him at the railroad station. The gentleman that hosted Davis during his stay threw a big dinner for the president and invited Beauregard. The general declined the offer and wrote, "I thank you for your kind invitation. It would afford me much pleasure to dine with you, but candor requires me to inform you that my relations with the president being strictly official, I cannot participate in any act of politeness which might make him suppose otherwise." One thing that enraged Beauregard was Davis's address to the people of Charleston at City Hall. Beauregard felt that the president didn't give him enough credit for defending Charleston and instead gave more compliments to other officers around the city. Davis, within his speech, talked about personal feuds. Beauregard took this to heart. Writing to a friend, he said, "Davis did more than if he had thrust a fratricidal dagger into my heart. He has killed my enthusiasm in our holy cause. May God forgive him. I fear I shall not have charity enough to pardon him." Into the winter of 1863-64, Beauregard despaired at the Confederate situation as he attempted to break the blockade around Charleston. His idea for a torpedo boat became a reality. A cigar-shaped boat named the David, with a spar with a torpedo attached containing 75 pounds of black powder at the end, was built to try and destroy the Union ironclads. The mission was a partial success. The torpedo struck the ironclad 6 feet below the waterline. The shower of water created by the explosion put out the David's engine compartment, and it drifted out to sea, with the crew either being captured or jumping overboard. The winter brought a depression over Beauregard, who wrote to a friend, "I fear they intend to send me to the West at the 11th hour and without adequate resources. I hear that if Lee defeats the Federals, he will go west and I will be sent to Virginia. I do not want to command an army whose job is to watch a defeated foe. My health is too bad for me to take the field, but if I have to, I desire the command of my former army. We must concentrate our forces at a decisive point." To another he wrote, "Next spring-summer will see our defeat. My usefulness in the war is ended. If a war starts in Europe, I will offer my services to some nation there. Why hasn't the Confederacy produced a great captain like Napoleon? Is it not because we have a power near the throne too egotistical and jealous to allow such a genius to develop itself while saving the country?" The only significant military operation during the winter centered around a submarine that sank during a test run. It was named the H.L. Hunley, and the next crew used a torpedo spar to sink the Federal ship named the Housatonic, but the Hunley also sank during the mission. In early March 1864, while Beauregard was in Florida, he received a message informing him that his wife had passed away on March 2nd. Beauregard used a French sailor to carry letters from himself to his wife in the federally occupied New Orleans, and from Miss Beauregard to her husband. She had been sick for a while. Union General Benjamin Butler, who commanded New Orleans for a time, offered to allow Beauregard to come into Union lines to visit his wife, but Beauregard didn't accept the invitation. Beauregard, though hurt at the loss of his wife, knew she hadn't suffered as other Southern women who labored to support the Confederacy. Years later, when someone wanted to write a biography of multiple Confederate women, they approached Beauregard about including his wife in the book. He replied, "I would accept with pleasure if the one I love so dearly had done more than to pray and suffer in silence for the success of our sacred cause." Her last words were indeed worthy of a Roman matron, but what are words to the acts of those noble-hearted women who devoted their time and labor to assisting and taking care of the sick and wounded, besides encouraging the faint-hearted? These are the heroic women whose names and conduct should be transmitted to future generations. I beg then and entreat in the name of the South that you should have your biography published. Beauregard spent a great deal of time devising grand plans for other armies and commanders, but none of them were accepted by the President. In April, he received word that he would no longer command the coast in Charleston. He was ordered to Virginia to take over some troops in that state, as the spring campaigns were about to begin.